The autumn rain drummed against the towering glass windows of Thornfield Corporate Plaza as Edward Collins adjusted his security uniform and settled behind the mahogany reception desk for another long night shift. At 38, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his current position, though few of the executives rushing past ever bothered to look closely enough to notice. His dark hair was beginning to show silver at the temples, a reminder of the stress that had aged him beyond his years, and his intelligent brown eyes held depths of experience that went far beyond checking visitor badges and monitoring security cameras. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever made assumptions about someone based on their appearance, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have an even more shocking story about first impressions gone wrong. 3 years ago, Edward's life had been unrecognizably different. As the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, he had been Meridian City's youngest tech billionaire, pioneering cloud infrastructure solutions that had transformed how global corporations manage their data. His penthouse office on the 52nd floor of the Apex Tower had commanded panoramic views of the city's skyline, and his calendar had been booked solid with meetings that shaped the future of digital commerce. Photos from those days showed a confident man in $1,000 suits, shaking hands with world leaders and delivering keynote speeches to auditoriums filled with industry luminaries. The fall had been swift and merciless. When his wife Sarah had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer, Edward had made the decision that would ultimately cost him everything. He had chosen family over empire. While he spent months at her bedside during treatments and surgeries, his business partners had maneuvered behind the scenes, citing his emotional instability and inability to maintain focus during critical growth periods. By the time Sarah lost her courageous battle 18 months later, Edward had been systematically pushed out of his own company through a series of legal maneuvers that left him with barely enough to cover mounting medical debts. The life insurance had provided some cushion, but not nearly enough to maintain their previous lifestyle while grieving and caring for a traumatized 5-year-old daughter. Edward had discovered that being a former tech CEO meant remarkably little when potential employers saw his recent history of corporate instability and worried about his ability to commit fully to demanding executive roles. Pride had prevented him from reaching out to old contacts who might have offered charity positions, and practical necessity had driven him to accept whatever honest work he could find. Thornfield Corporate Plaza had offered steady employment with health insurance and flexible scheduling that allowed him to be present for Lily's morning routine and evening homework sessions. The night shift meant fewer interactions with people who might recognize him from his former life, and the quiet hours gave him time to research new opportunities while keeping watch over the building's after-hours activities. It wasn't the career he had planned, but it was honest work that kept food on their table and provided the stability that Lily needed during her ongoing adjustment to life without her mother. The small apartment they now called home bore little resemblance to the sprawling estate they had once enjoyed. Located in Riverside Gardens, a middle-class neighborhood known for its good schools and family-friendly atmosphere, their 2-bedroom unit was furnished with a careful mixture of a few treasured pieces from their former life and practical items chosen for durability rather than style. Lily's room had been Edward's priority during the move. Her books, art supplies, and educational materials arranged with the same attention to detail that had once characterized his corporate presentations. The living room doubled as Edward's home office, where he spent his free time learning new technologies and maintaining the professional connections that might someday lead to career restoration. But the most remarkable transformation had been in Lily herself. The shy, withdrawn child who had struggled to cope with her mother's illness had gradually revealed an extraordinary gift for understanding human nature. While other children her age played with toys or video games, Lily created intricate drawings that mapped the emotional patterns of the people around her. Her sketches showed how stress moved through groups of adults, how conflicts developed between personality types, and how teams could be restructured to maximize both productivity and happiness. Teachers at Riverside Elementary had initially worried about her tendency to observe rather than participate, but they had quickly learned to value her insights when classroom disputes arose. Edward often marveled at his daughter's intuitive understanding of corporate dynamics, insights that would have been invaluable during his years of managing large teams and complex organizational structures. Lily could spend an hour watching the interactions in a restaurant and then draw diagrams showing which servers worked best together, which managers created stress through poor communication, and how small changes in workflow could improve both customer satisfaction and employee morale. It was as if she possessed a natural understanding of the human systems that Edward had spent years learning to navigate through trial and expensive error. Tonight, as on most evenings, Lily sat at a small desk beside Edward's security station, her homework spread out in neat piles while she worked through mathematics problems that challenged students 2 grades above her level. Riverside Elementary had recognized her academic gifts early, but they had also understood that her social development required careful nurturing. The arrangement with Thornfield Plaza's management allowed her to accompany Edward during his shifts when necessary, and she had become a familiar and beloved presence among the building's evening cleaning staff and late-working tenants. The security office itself was a study in functional efficiency, with multiple monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the building, a communication system that connected to local emergency services, and filing cabinets containing visitor logs and incident reports that Edward maintained with meticulous attention to detail. His supervisors had quickly learned to rely on his analytical approach to security management, and his suggestions for improving both safety protocols and operational efficiency had earned him quiet respect among the building's administrative staff. As the evening settled into its familiar rhythm, Edward reviewed the night's visitor schedule while Lily worked steadily through her assignments, occasionally pausing to sketch patterns she observed in the mathematical relationships between numbers. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, and the building's atmospheric lighting cast warm shadows across the marble lobby that would soon witness an encounter that would change everything both of them thought they knew about second chances and the true meaning of success. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m. in the modest 2-bedroom apartment at Riverside Gardens, but Edward Collins had already been awake for 20 minutes, lying quietly in the pre-dawn darkness and mentally preparing for another day of carefully orchestrated routines. After 3 years of single parenthood, he had learned that structure was the invisible foundation that kept their rebuilt life stable, and every morning began with the same precise choreography of breakfast preparation, school readiness, and gentle encouragement that helped Lily face a world that often moved too fast for her sensitive nature. Their kitchen was small, but efficiently organized, with Lily's favorite breakfast items arranged at child-friendly heights and her daily vitamins lined up in a colorful pill organizer that made morning medication feel less clinical and more like a game. Edward had become an expert at creating nutritious meals on a security guard's budget, and the apartment's modest dining nook had become their sanctuary for quiet conversations about homework, friendships, and the complex emotions that came with growing up without a mother's guidance. "Oh, good morning, sweetheart," Edward said softly as Lily appeared in the doorway wearing her carefully chosen school outfit. A blue dress with matching leggings that she had selected because the colors reminded her of the mathematical patterns she loved to draw. Her dark hair, so much like her mother's, was already neatly braided thanks to her own meticulous attention to detail, and she carried her leather-bound notebook that had become her constant companion for capturing the human behavioral patterns she observed throughout her day. The apartment bore evidence of their careful adaptation to reduced circumstances while maintaining the intellectual stimulation that both father and daughter craved. The living room walls were lined with bookshelves built from affordable particle board but filled with carefully selected volumes on psychology, mathematics, business theory, and children's literature that Edward had managed to save from their previous library. Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator and hallway walls, not typical child drawings of stick figures and houses, but sophisticated diagrams showing how different personality types interacted, how classroom dynamics shifted when teachers changed their management styles, and how family structures adapted to stress and change. Edward's own workspace occupied one corner of the living room, where his refurbished laptop sat surrounded by notebooks filled with industry research and professional development materials. Despite working night shifts in security, he spent his free time maintaining expertise in emerging technologies, networking with former colleagues through carefully worded LinkedIn messages, and slowly building the foundation for an eventual return to the corporate world that had once embraced and then rejected him. The commute to Riverside Elementary took exactly 12 minutes on foot, and Edward treasured these daily walks with Lily as opportunities for unstructured conversation about her observations, concerns, and dreams. She had a remarkable ability to notice details that escaped adult attention, which neighbors seemed stressed about work, which shopkeepers had changed their interaction styles, which classmates were struggling with problems at home that affected their behavior in group settings. This morning's walk revealed new insights about her third-grade teacher's management approach and how recent changes in classroom seating arrangements had improved focus among students who had previously struggled with attention issues. Edward listened with the focused attention of someone who recognized that his daughter's observations often contained wisdom that corporate consultants charged thousands of dollars to provide. Mrs. Henderson moved Jake and Tyler to opposite sides of the room, Lily explained, unconsciously sketching organizational patterns in the air with her hands as they walked. Now Tyler focuses better because he's not competing for attention, and Jake can help Maria with reading because she learns better with peer support than teacher instruction. Edward smiled, recognizing in his daughter's analysis the same systematic thinking that had once made him successful in optimizing team dynamics and organizational structures. What made you notice that particular change? The stress pattern shifted, Lily replied matter-of-factly, as if reading human emotional states was as natural as observing weather patterns. When people are in the wrong positions, there's tension in how they move and speak. When the structure matches their personalities, everything flows more smoothly. After dropping Lily at school, Edward returned home for a few hours of sleep before beginning his afternoon routine of household management, grocery shopping on a carefully planned budget, and preparation for another night shift at Thornfield Plaza. The afternoon hours also provided time for the ongoing project that had become his secret hope for financial recovery, a detailed business plan for a consulting firm that would apply advanced behavioral analysis to corporate team optimization. The irony was not lost on him that his daughter's natural gifts had revealed insights that could revolutionize how companies approached human resources and organizational development. Lily's ability to visualize interaction patterns and predict how changes in structure would affect performance represented exactly the kind of innovation that forward-thinking corporations paid premium prices to access. But translating an 8-year-old's intuitive genius into marketable business solutions required capital, connections, and credibility that Edward's current circumstances made difficult to obtain. His laptop contained detailed case studies based on Lily's observations of various organizations, from her school's administrative structure to the management dynamics he witnessed during his security shifts at Thornfield Plaza. Each case study demonstrated how small adjustments in personnel positioning, communication protocols, and decision-making hierarchies could dramatically improve both productivity and employee satisfaction. The consulting methodology they had developed together combined traditional business analysis with Lily's pattern recognition abilities to create solutions that addressed both operational efficiency and human well-being. The afternoon ritual also included an hour of homeschool supplementation, during which Edward worked with Lily on advanced mathematics and science concepts that challenged her intellectual capabilities while building the analytical foundations that would serve her throughout life. These sessions had become precious opportunities for collaboration, as Lily's questions often pushed Edward to think about familiar concepts from entirely new perspectives. Today's mathematics lesson focused on statistical analysis of behavioral patterns. Using data that Lily had collected from observations of playground interactions over the past month, her notebooks contained detailed records of how group dynamics shifted based on weather conditions, which leadership styles emerged under different types of stress, and how individual personality traits affected collective decision-making processes. Edward helped her organize this data into charts and graphs that revealed patterns even she hadn't consciously recognized. "Look at this correlation," Lily said, pointing to a graph that showed the relationship between outdoor temperature and cooperation levels during recess activities. When it's moderately cool, collaborative games increase by 37% compared to very hot or very cold days. Edward studied her data with genuine admiration for both her observational skills and her instinctive understanding of statistical significance. "What do you think causes that pattern?" "Physical comfort affects emotional availability," she replied, unconsciously echoing principles that corporate wellness consultants spent years learning to articulate. When people aren't distracted by being too hot or too cold, they have more mental energy available for cooperation and creative problem-solving. As evening approached and Edward prepared for another night shift, he reflected on the strange duality of their current existence. By day, they lived as ordinary residents of a middle-class neighborhood, navigating the challenges of single parenthood and modest income with dignity and careful planning. But beneath the surface, they possessed insights and capabilities that could transform how organizations understood human potential and collective achievement. The security uniform hanging in his closet represented both the reality of their current circumstances and the disguise that allowed them to observe the corporate world from an unexpected vantage point. Tonight, like every night, Edward would sit behind the reception desk at Thornfield Plaza, watching executives rush past him toward elevators that carried them to positions he had once held, while his extraordinary daughter worked quietly beside him, mapping the human dynamics that those same executives struggled to understand and manage effectively. Neither of them suspected that this particular evening would bring an encounter that would finally bridge the gap between their hidden potential and the recognition they deserved, or that a powerful marketing executive's moment of crisis would become the catalyst for revealing just how much wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Thornfield Plaza was ablaze with tension as Cassie Gray paced behind the polished conference table, her reflection multiplied endlessly in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of Meridian City's glittering skyline. At 34, she had fought her way through the testosterone-fueled world of corporate marketing with a combination of brilliant strategy, relentless work ethic, and an unwavering belief that success meant never showing weakness. Tonight, however, all of those carefully cultivated strengths felt inadequate against the crisis that threatened to destroy everything she had built. The disaster had begun 3 days earlier, when Pinnacle Dynamics' revolutionary wellness app, MindBridge, had launched to what should have been widespread acclaim. Instead, user reviews had turned catastrophically negative within hours, with complaints ranging from confusing interface design to algorithms that seemed to worsen rather than improve users' mental health outcomes. The app that was supposed to democratize access to psychological wellness tools had somehow become a source of additional stress and frustration for the very people it was designed to help. "The retention rate is dropping 17% every 6 hours," announced James Fletcher, Pinnacle's chief technology officer, his voice carrying the strained quality of someone who had been surviving on coffee and adrenaline for 72 consecutive hours. "We're looking at complete market rejection if we can't identify and fix the core problems within the next 48 hours. Cassie stopped pacing and gripped the back of a leather chair, forcing herself to project the confident leadership that her team desperately needed, while internally struggling with the growing realization that traditional problem-solving approaches were proving inadequate. Her background in consumer psychology and market research had prepared her for many challenges, but not for the kind of systematic user alienation that seemed to defy logical analysis. "What exactly are users saying in their feedback?" she asked, though she had already memorized the most damning reviews that painted MindBridge as everything from emotionally manipulative to psychologically harmful. "That's the problem," replied Dr. Sarah Chen, the app's chief behavioral psychologist. "The complaints are contradictory. Some users say the interface is too complex. Others say it's too simplistic. Some feel the algorithms are too intrusive. Others say they're not personalized enough. It's like we've somehow managed to create something that frustrates everyone for completely different reasons." The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of climate control systems and the distant sounds of traffic 42 floors below. Cassie had assembled the best minds available, experts in user experience design, behavioral psychology, data analytics, and consumer marketing. But their collective expertise seemed powerless against a problem that appeared to shift and evolve every time they thought they understood its parameters. "We're missing something fundamental," Cassie said finally, her voice carrying a note of frustrated bewilderment that would have shocked colleagues accustomed to her usual unshakable confidence. "It's not just technical glitches or design flaws. There's something about how people are actually experiencing the app that we're not seeing." Outside the conference room windows, the evening rush hour had given way to the quieter rhythms of night shift workers and late evening commuters. Security guards patrolled empty lobbies, cleaning crews began their methodical progression through vacant offices, and skeleton staffs maintained the essential systems that kept the city's commercial heart beating through the dark hours. Most of the executives in Pinnacle's crisis meeting had never given serious thought to these invisible workers, whose labor made their own success possible. Dr. Chen pulled up a series of user interface screenshots on the room's massive display screen, pointing to design elements that had tested positively in focus groups but were somehow producing negative reactions in real-world usage. "The psychological profiling algorithms are functioning exactly as designed," she explained. "They're identifying user personality types, stress patterns, and emotional needs with 93% accuracy. But instead of feeling helped, users report feeling categorized, judged, or manipulated. "It's like the app is too smart," added Marcus Rivera, the lead user experience designer. "Users don't want to feel like a computer understands their psychology better than they understand themselves, even if that understanding is accurate and helpful." Cassie studied the interface displays with growing frustration, recognizing the irony that an app designed to improve mental health was instead triggering feelings of vulnerability and loss of autonomy among its users. The technology worked perfectly from a technical standpoint, but it was failing catastrophically from a human standpoint, and that gap between technical success and human acceptance was something that traditional corporate analysis seemed unable to bridge. The marketing research that had guided Mindbridge's development had been exhaustive, involving focus groups, surveys, demographic analysis, and competitive benchmarking that had cost Pinnacle Dynamics over $2 million and consumed 8 months of intensive preparation. Yet somehow, all of that professional expertise had missed the fundamental disconnect between what users said they wanted and how they actually responded when those features were implemented. "We need to understand the human element that our data isn't capturing," Cassie said, unconsciously echoing insights that an 8-year-old girl was developing 42 floors below. "There's something about human psychology and technology interaction that we're approaching from the wrong angle." As the evening wore on, and the crisis team continued their analysis, none of them suspected that the solution to their problem was sitting at a security desk in the building's lobby, quietly working on homework, while her father monitored after-hours access and maintained the safety protocols that protected their high-stakes deliberations. They had no way of knowing that Lily Collins possessed exactly the kind of intuitive understanding of human behavior patterns that could reveal why their meticulously designed app was producing reactions opposite to its intended effects. The irony would have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so serious. A team of highly paid experts struggling to understand human psychology, while a child who saw behavioral patterns as naturally as others saw colors sat unnoticed in the same building, her notebooks filled with insights that could transform not just their app but their entire approach to human-centered design. Cassie's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Pinnacle's CEO. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow 8 a.m. Need solutions or we're pulling Mindbridge from market and cutting losses. This is your career on the line." The message sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the conference room's aggressive air conditioning. She had staked her professional reputation on Mindbridge's success, convincing the board to invest $23 million in development and marketing based on her confident predictions of market acceptance and user adoption. Failure wouldn't just mean the loss of her current position. It would mark her as someone who had fundamentally misunderstood consumer psychology in an industry where such mistakes were rarely forgiven. As midnight approached and the crisis team prepared for another sleepless night of analysis and troubleshooting, Cassie found herself staring out at the city lights and wondering if there was some crucial perspective she was missing. Some way of understanding human nature that her expensive education and years of corporate experience had somehow failed to provide. She had no way of knowing that the answer to her desperate question was already in the building, quietly observing the world with the kind of clarity that only comes from seeing patterns without the preconceptions that expertise sometimes creates. The stage was set for an encounter that would challenge everything Cassie thought she knew about intelligence, insight, and the true sources of wisdom in a world that too often confused credentials with understanding. The rain hammered against the glass facade of Thornfield Plaza with increasing intensity as Thursday evening dissolved into the early hours of Friday morning, and Cassie Gray stood at the conference room windows watching water cascade down the exterior in sheets that distorted the city lights into abstract patterns of color and movement. Behind her, the crisis team had finally admitted defeat for the night, their laptops closed and their notes scattered across the polished table like evidence of a battle they were steadily losing. "We'll reconvene at 6 a.m., Cassie announced to the exhausted group, her voice carrying the forced authority of someone trying to project confidence, while internally grappling with the growing certainty that conventional solutions would not be sufficient to save Mindbridge or her career. "I want fresh perspectives and creative thinking. We're obviously missing something fundamental about human psychology that our traditional approaches haven't captured." As her team gathered their materials and prepared to return home for a few hours of restless sleep, Cassie remained at the windows, unwilling to face the empty apartment that awaited her in the luxury high-rise district where successful executives isolated themselves from the complexities of ordinary human experience. The irony was bitter. She had spent years studying consumer behavior and market psychology, yet she felt completely disconnected from understanding why real people were rejecting something designed specifically to help them. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unknown number, and Cassie almost ignored it before recognizing the area code as local and deciding that any distraction was preferable to continuing her spiral of self-doubt and professional anxiety. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and barely containing panic that mirrored her own desperate emotional state. "Ms. Gray, this is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian General Hospital's Behavioral Health Department. I apologize for calling so late, but we have an emergency situation that requires immediate consultation with someone who understands psychological wellness technology." Cassie straightened, her marketing instincts immediately alert to both opportunity and potential disaster. Meridian General was one of the largest hospital systems in the region, and their endorsement could salvage Mindbridge's reputation, but their public criticism could ensure its complete destruction. "What kind of emergency are we talking about?" Cassie asked, already calculating the implications of whatever crisis had driven a hospital administrator to cold call her at nearly 1 in the morning. "We've had 17 patients admitted to our emergency psychiatric services in the past 6 hours, Jennifer continued, her voice tight with barely controlled alarm. "All of them were using your Mindbridge application, and all of them report that the app somehow triggered severe anxiety episodes, panic attacks, or emotional breakdowns that required immediate medical intervention." The words hit Cassie like a physical blow, and she gripped the window frame to steady herself as the full magnitude of the disaster became clear. This wasn't just market rejection or poor user reviews. People were being actively harmed by technology she had confidently promised would improve their mental health and emotional well-being. "That's impossible," she said weakly, though even as the words left her mouth she knew they were inadequate against the reality of human suffering. Mindbridge's algorithms are designed specifically to provide supportive, non-threatening guidance. Every feature has been tested and validated by licensed psychologists. "Miss Gray, I'm not calling to debate the theoretical safety of your technology," Jennifer replied with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to dealing with life-and-death situations. "I'm calling because we need someone who understands how your app works to help us figure out what's causing these reactions so we can treat our patients effectively." Cassie's mind raced through the implications of 17 people requiring emergency psychiatric care after using Mindbridge, calculating not just the legal liability and regulatory consequences, but the devastating impact on public trust and corporate reputation. If news of the hospital admissions reached the media before they could identify and fix whatever was causing the problem, Pinnacle Dynamics would face not just market failure, but potential criminal liability for creating technology that harmed vulnerable populations. "I'll be there immediately," she said, already gathering her coat and bag while simultaneously calling for her driver. "Can you give me any details about what these patients experienced while using the app?" "They're reporting feelings of being analyzed, categorized, and manipulated by something they couldn't control or understand," Jennifer explained as Cassie hurried toward the elevator. Several mentioned feeling like the app knew things about them that they didn't want to acknowledge, and that this knowledge was being used against them rather than to help them. Heivel. The elevator descended through Thornfield Plaza's 42 floors while Cassie processed the horrifying possibility that Mindbridge's sophisticated psychological profiling, the feature she had been most proud of during development, was somehow triggering exactly the kind of vulnerability and loss of autonomy that traumatized individuals feared most. The app was designed to provide personalized support, but it was apparently making users feel exposed and powerless instead of empowered and understood. As the elevator reached the lobby level, Cassie's attention was focused entirely on the crisis ahead and the phone calls she needed to make to mobilize Pinnacle's legal and public relations teams for damage control. She barely registered the security desk where Edward Collins sat monitoring building access, while his daughter worked quietly on what appeared to be homework assignments, their presence as invisible to her rushing passage as the cleaning staff or maintenance workers who kept her corporate world functioning smoothly. The lobby's marble floors reflected the harsh emergency lighting that activated during late-night hours, and Cassie's heels clicked against the stone with the urgent rhythm of someone whose entire professional identity was crumbling with each passing moment. Through the glass doors, she could see her driver waiting in the circular drive, the black sedan's engine running and headlights cutting through the rain that showed no signs of diminishing. But as she reached for the door handle, something made her pause. A soft sound that seemed incongruous with the stark efficiency of the corporate environment. Turning slightly, she saw the security guard's daughter looking up from her work with an expression of gentle concern, as if she had somehow sensed the emotional turmoil that Cassie was struggling to contain beneath her professional facade. For just a moment, their eyes met across the lobby's expanse, and Cassie felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, not of the child herself, but of something in her calm, observant gaze that suggested a kind of understanding that went deeper than the superficial sympathy typically offered by strangers. It was the look of someone who saw patterns and connections that others missed, though Cassie had no context for interpreting what she was observing. The moment passed quickly as urgency reasserted itself, and Cassie pushed through the doors into the storm that would carry her toward a hospital filled with people whose suffering had been inadvertently caused by technology she had believed would heal them. Behind her, Edward Collins watched her departure with the quiet attention of someone who had spent years observing the behavior of corporate executives under stress, while Lily returned to her notebook with an expression of thoughtful concentration that suggested she was processing observations that might prove crucial to understanding exactly why well-intentioned technology could produce such devastating unintended consequences. The night was about to become much longer and more challenging for everyone involved, though none of them yet understood how their separate struggles would eventually converge into an encounter that would transform not just Mindbridge's troubled launch, but their fundamental understanding of how human wisdom could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The crisis was deepening, but so was the potential for revelation and redemption that often accompanied the darkest moments of professional and personal testing. The fluorescent lights of Meridian General Hospital's emergency psychiatric ward cast harsh shadows across the waiting area where Cassie Gray sat, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a medical facility operating under crisis conditions. For the past 4 hours, she had listened to testimonies from patients whose experiences with Mindbridge had triggered psychological breakdowns ranging from severe anxiety attacks to complete emotional shutdown, and each account had driven home the devastating reality that her life's work had somehow become a source of harm rather than healing. Dr. Rebecca Torres, the hospital's chief of psychiatric services, emerged from the consultation room where she had been interviewing the latest Mindbridge-related admission, a 28-year-old teacher whose panic attack had been so severe that paramedics had found her hyperventilating in her apartment bathroom, convinced that the app had somehow invaded her mind and was manipulating her thoughts. "Hello, Ms. Gray, we need to talk," Dr. Torres said, her expression carrying the grave authority of someone who had spent 15 years treating psychological trauma and recognized genuine crisis when she encountered it. "What we're seeing isn't random user dissatisfaction. There's a consistent pattern to these breakdowns that suggests your app is triggering specific psychological vulnerabilities in ways that your development team apparently didn't anticipate." Cassie followed Dr. Torres to a small office where patient files were spread across every available surface, each representing someone whose trust in technology had been catastrophically betrayed by algorithms designed to help them. The weight of responsibility felt crushing as she realized that her confident predictions about Mindbridge's beneficial impact had been not just wrong, but dangerously naive. "Show me the pattern," Cassie said, forcing herself to confront the evidence of her failure with the same analytical focus that had once made her successful in less consequential marketing campaigns. Dr. Torres pulled up a series of case summaries on her computer screen, highlighting common elements in the patient's experiences that painted a disturbing picture of psychological manipulation disguised as therapeutic support. "Your app's personality profiling is incredibly accurate," she explained. "Too accurate. It's identifying users' deepest insecurities, defense mechanisms, and emotional triggers with surgical precision, then offering advice that makes people feel like they're being psychologically dissected by an entity they can't control or escape." The revelation hit Cassie like a physical blow as she understood for the first time why Mindbridge's technical sophistication had translated into human suffering. The app wasn't failing because it was inaccurate. It was failing because it was too accurate, revealing truths about users' psychological states that they weren't prepared to confront, especially from a source that felt mechanical and manipulative rather than empathetic and supportive. "We designed the algorithms to be helpful," Cassie said weakly, though she was beginning to understand that good intentions were meaningless when divorced from genuine understanding of human emotional needs. The psychological profiling was supposed to enable personalized support. "Personalized support requires trust, empathy, and genuine human connection," Dr. Torres replied with the patient firmness of someone explaining fundamental principles to a student who had somehow missed essential lessons. Your app provides analysis without relationship, insight without intimacy, and advice without the emotional safety that makes people receptive to psychological guidance. As dawn broke over Meridian City, casting pale light through the hospital's institutional windows, Cassie found herself facing the complete collapse of everything she had believed about consumer psychology and human-centered design. The expertise that had made her successful in traditional marketing was proving inadequate for understanding the deeper emotional needs that determined how people responded to technology that touched their most vulnerable psychological states. Her phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from Pinnacle's CEO, board members, and legal team, all demanding immediate answers and solutions that she simply didn't possess. The media had begun picking up reports of the hospital admissions, and social media was exploding with warnings about Mindbridge's psychological dangers that would destroy any possibility of market recovery. "Dr. Torres, I need your professional opinion," Cassie said, her voice carrying the desperation of someone whose entire identity was crumbling. "Is there any way to fix this? Can we modify the algorithms to provide the same level of personalization without triggering these traumatic responses?" "The problem isn't technical," Dr. Torres replied, her tone carrying both sympathy and the unflinching honesty that medical professionals learn to deliver when facing impossible situations. "The problem is that you're trying to automate something that fundamentally requires human intuition, emotional intelligence, and the kind of wisdom that comes from genuine understanding of how people experience vulnerability and trust." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jennifer Walsh, who had been coordinating between the hospital's emergency response and Pinnacle's crisis management team throughout the night. Her expression carried news that Cassie immediately recognized as catastrophic even before she spoke. "Ms. Gray, we've just received reports from 3 other hospitals in the metropolitan area," Jennifer announced, her professional composure barely containing her obvious alarm. "Mercy General has admitted 8 more Mindbridge users, St. Mary's has 6, and Regional Medical Center is reporting 12 additional cases. We're looking at coordinated psychological crisis across the entire city." The numbers hit Cassie like successive physical blows as she calculated the implications of over 40 people requiring emergency psychiatric care after using an app she had marketed as safe and beneficial. The legal liability alone would destroy Pinnacle Dynamics, but the human cost was what truly devastated her. Dozens of people seeking help for mental health challenges had instead been traumatized by technology she had confidently promised would improve their lives. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, hesitating before delivering what was clearly the most difficult news. "Channel 7 is running a special investigation tonight about, quote, dangerous wellness apps. And they've specifically requested an interview with you about Mindbridge's role in what they're calling the largest technology-induced psychological crisis in the city's history." Cassie closed her eyes and tried to process the reality that her career, her company's future, and her personal reputation were being destroyed by forces she had completely failed to understand, despite years of professional training and millions of dollars in market research. She had approached human psychology like a technical problem to be solved through data analysis and algorithmic optimization, never recognizing that genuine understanding of human emotional needs required something deeper than expertise. It required wisdom. As she sat in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital office, surrounded by evidence of suffering caused by her confident miscalculations, Cassie found herself wondering if there was anyone who truly understood how technology could serve human emotional needs without causing the kind of psychological harm that her sophisticated algorithms had inadvertently created. She needed insights that went beyond traditional corporate consulting, beyond academic psychology, beyond the conventional wisdom that had guided her disastrous decision-making. What she didn't know was that exactly the kind of intuitive understanding she desperately needed was sitting 43 floors below in the security office of Thornfield Plaza, where an 8-year-old girl was quietly documenting behavioral patterns that revealed truths about human nature that no amount of market research or focus group testing had managed to capture. The solution to her crisis existed, but it would require abandoning her assumptions about where wisdom could be found and opening herself to guidance from sources that her professional training had taught her to dismiss as irrelevant. The longest night of her career was about to become even more challenging, but it was also about to become the beginning of an education in human understanding that would transform not just her approach to technology, but her fundamental beliefs about intelligence, insight, and the unexpected places where genuine wisdom could be discovered. The elevator in Thornfield Plaza climbed silently toward the 42nd floor as Cassie Gray stood rigid against the polished steel wall, her reflection fractured into countless versions of a woman who no longer recognized herself or her capabilities. It was 3:47 a.m., and she was returning to collect research files and prepare for what would likely be her final board presentation in 6 hours. A desperate attempt to propose solutions she didn't actually possess for a crisis that had evolved far beyond her expertise to manage. The previous 8 hours at Meridian General had fundamentally shattered her understanding of consumer psychology and human-centered design. Every patient interview had revealed new layers of psychological complexity that her algorithms had failed to navigate, and every conversation with medical professionals had highlighted blind spots in her approach that seemed almost criminally naive in retrospect. She needed a miracle, but her rational mind knew that miracles didn't exist in the corporate world, only competence, preparation, and the kind of deep insights that she was beginning to understand she had never actually possessed. As the elevator doors opened onto the darkened executive floor, Cassie was surprised to see lights still burning in the Pinnacle Dynamics conference room, where her crisis team had supposedly departed hours earlier. Through the glass walls, she could see two figures hunched over laptops surrounded by the debris of another failed brainstorming session, Drive. Chen and Marcus Rivera, apparently unable to sleep while their professional reputations crumbled along with the company's future. "Any breakthroughs?" Cassie asked as she entered the conference room, though the exhaustion in their faces already provided the answer. "We've been running behavioral simulations all night," Dr. Chen replied, gesturing toward screens filled with user interface mock-ups and psychological flowcharts that looked increasingly desperate in their complexity. "Every modification we test either reduces the app's effectiveness or triggers the same emotional reactions we're trying to avoid. It's like there's some fundamental incompatibility between algorithmic analysis and human emotional receptivity that we can't engineer our way around." Marcus looked up from his laptop with the hollow-eyed expression of someone who had spent years perfecting user experience design, only to discover that his expertise was inadequate for understanding how people actually experience technology. "We've tried everything. Softer language, more gradual revelation of insights, user control over the depth of analysis, even adding artificial delays to make the profiling feel less instantaneous. Nothing works because the problem isn't how we're presenting the psychological insights. It's that people fundamentally reject being analyzed by something that doesn't understand them as human beings." Cassie slumped into a chair as the full hopelessness of their situation became clear. They were trapped in a technical approach to human psychology that treated emotional needs like engineering problems to be solved through optimization and iteration. But human trust and emotional safety couldn't be programmed. They emerged from relationships, empathy, and the kind of intuitive understanding that seemed to exist outside the realm of corporate consulting and algorithmic development. "There has to be someone who understands this," she said, more to herself than to her colleagues. "Someone who knows how to approach human psychology in ways that feel supportive rather than invasive, helpful rather than manipulative." The words hung in the air as all three of them contemplated the irony that despite their combined expertise in psychology, technology, and user experience design, they were completely stumped by the challenge of creating technology that felt genuinely helpful to people experiencing emotional vulnerability. They had succeeded brilliantly at the technical aspects of psychological analysis while failing catastrophically at the human aspects of emotional support. As they sat in defeated silence, a soft sound from the hallway caught their attention, footsteps that seemed too light and measured to belong to security guards or cleaning crew members. Through the glass wall, they saw a small figure moving past the conference room, with the careful, observant gait of someone navigating an unfamiliar environment while maintaining acute awareness of surrounding details. "Is that a child?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the disbelief of someone unaccustomed to seeing anything other than corporate efficiency in the sterile environment of executive floors. Cassie moved to the window and watched as the 8-year-old girl paused near the elevator bank, studying the building directory with the focused attention of someone trying to understand complex organizational structures. There was something in the child's demeanor that suggested unusual maturity and observational skills, a quality of calm assessment that seemed oddly professional despite her obviously young age. "She must be with the security guard," Dr. Chen observed, remembering their brief glimpse of the uniformed man behind the lobby desk during their rushed arrival earlier in the evening. "Some kind of bring-your-child-to-work arrangement." But as they watched, the girl's behavior revealed something more intriguing than simple presence in an adult workplace. She was examining the floor plan with the methodical attention of someone who processed spatial relationships and organizational hierarchies as naturally as other children absorbed playground dynamics. Her head tilted slightly as she studied the layout, and her hands moved unconsciously, as if sketching invisible patterns that connected different areas of the building's corporate geography. "Look at how she's reading that directory," Cassie said, her voice carrying a note of professional curiosity that cut through her exhaustion. "She's not just looking for a specific office. She's analyzing the whole organizational structure, like she's trying to understand how information and authority flow through the building." The observation was accurate in ways that none of them fully comprehended. Lily Collins was indeed mapping organizational patterns, but her analysis went far deeper than architectural layout or corporate hierarchy. She was visualizing the human systems that operated within the physical structure, how stress moved between departments, how decision-making authority created bottlenecks or enabled efficiency, how the building's design either supported or hindered the kind of collaborative problem-solving that complex challenges required. As they watched through the conference room windows, Lily pulled a notebook from her small backpack and began sketching with quick, confident strokes that suggested she was capturing insights rather than making random drawings. Her pencil moved in patterns that seemed to flow organically across the page, creating diagrams that looked simultaneously mathematical and artistic, technical and intuitive. "What is she drawing?" Marcus asked, his designer's eye recognizing sophisticated visual thinking despite not understanding its specific content. The question sparked something in Cassie's mind, a recognition that they had been observing someone who approached complex systems with exactly the kind of intuitive understanding that their algorithmic solutions lacked. This child wasn't just present in their corporate environment. She was actively analyzing it using cognitive tools that seemed fundamentally different from the technical approaches that had proven so inadequate for understanding human emotional needs. "I want to talk to her," Cassie said suddenly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "Talk to her about what?" Dr. Chen asked. "She's 8 years old. About how she sees patterns," Cassie replied, moving toward the conference room door with the first sense of purposeful direction she had felt in hours. "About how she understands systems and relationships. We've been trying to solve human psychology like an engineering problem, but maybe we need to learn from someone who sees human behavior more naturally." The idea was unconventional to the point of seeming ridiculous, but Cassie's professional instincts were telling her that conventional approaches had already failed catastrophically. If there was any possibility that this observant child possessed insights that could illuminate the blind spots in their understanding, she was desperate enough to explore it, regardless of how it might appear to her colleagues or corporate superiors. As she walked toward the elevator, Cassie felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced since the crisis began, not because she had any rational expectation that an 8-year-old could solve problems that had stumped teams of experts, but because she was finally open to the possibility that wisdom might exist in forms that her professional training had never taught her to recognize or value. The elevator descended through Thornfield Plaza's floors with mechanical precision, while Cassie Gray's mind raced through the implications of what she was about to do, approach a child for insights that teams of experts had failed to provide. As the numbers decreased on the digital display, she found herself questioning not just her desperation-driven decision, but the entire foundation of her professional confidence that had been systematically demolished over the past 12 hours. When the doors opened onto the lobby level, Cassie stepped into the subdued lighting of the after-hours corporate environment and immediately noticed how different everything felt from her usual daytime experiences in the building. The marble floors reflected emergency lighting in soft patterns. The silence was broken only by distant hums of climate control systems, and the overall atmosphere suggested a world where different rules applied, where conventional hierarchies might be less rigid and unexpected encounters might be possible. Edward Collins looked up from his security monitors as she approached, his expression shifting from routine professional courtesy to mild surprise at seeing an executive arriving at such an unusual hour. Behind him, Lily sat at her makeshift homework station, her notebook open to reveal intricate diagrams that seemed to map relationships and connections in ways that transcended simple organizational charts. "Good morning," Cassie said, her voice carrying the careful modulation of someone trying to appear composed while internally struggling with unprecedented uncertainty. "I'm Cassie Gray from Pinnacle Dynamics on the 42nd floor. I was wondering if I could speak with your daughter for a moment. The request was so unusual that Edward's professional training didn't provide a ready response. In 3 years of night security work, he had never encountered a corporate executive seeking conversation with an 8-year-old, especially not at 4 in the morning during what appeared to be a company crisis serious enough to keep entire teams working through the night. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Edward said, his protective instincts immediately alert, while his curiosity was piqued by the obvious desperation beneath Cassie's polished corporate facade. "We're dealing with a situation that involves understanding human psychology and behavioral patterns," Cassie explained, gesturing toward Lily's notebook with growing recognition that the child's drawings contained exactly the kind of sophisticated analysis that her team had been struggling to achieve. "Your daughter appears to have a remarkable ability to visualize complex systems, and I'm hoping she might offer a perspective that could help us solve a problem that's proving resistant to conventional approaches." Lily looked up from her work with the calm attention of someone accustomed to adult conversations while maintaining her own sense of autonomy and decision-making authority. Her dark eyes met Cassie's with an expression of gentle curiosity, rather than the intimidation or excitement that most children would display when approached by an obviously important business executive. "What kind of problem?" Lily asked, her voice carrying the clear articulation of someone who had learned to communicate complex ideas despite her young age. Cassie glanced at Edward, who nodded slightly in a gesture that granted permission while indicating he would remain close and attentive to ensure his daughter's comfort and safety. The trust implicit in that gesture struck Cassie as significant. Here was a parent who recognized his child's unusual capabilities while maintaining appropriate protective boundaries. "We created a technology application designed to help people with their emotional well-being," Cassie began, unconsciously simplifying her language while recognizing that Lily's attention suggested comprehension that might not require such adaptation. "But instead of helping people feel better, it's making them feel worse, and we can't understand why." Lily tilted her head slightly, processing this information with the kind of systematic thinking that Cassie was beginning to recognize as evidence of genuine analytical capability. "Can you show me how it works?" The request was both simple and profound, cutting through layers of technical complexity to focus on the essential question of user experience and emotional impact. Cassie pulled out her phone and opened MindBridge, navigating to the personality assessment that had been causing such devastating psychological reactions among users seeking mental health support. As the app's interface appeared on the screen, Lily's expression shifted to one of focused concentration that reminded Cassie of watching expert consultants analyze complex business problems. The child's eyes moved systematically across the visual elements, taking in not just the surface design but the underlying psychological assumptions that governed how information was presented and how user responses were processed. "It asks people to reveal private thoughts and feelings," Lily observed after studying the initial questionnaire screens. "But it doesn't explain why it needs this information or how it will use what people share. That would make vulnerable people feel unsafe." The insight hit Cassie like a revelation, illuminating a fundamental flaw that all of their sophisticated analysis had missed. MindBridge demanded intimate psychological disclosure without establishing the kind of emotional safety and trust that made such vulnerability possible. They had focused entirely on the technical accuracy of their profiling algorithms while ignoring the relational prerequisites that made people receptive to psychological insights. "Show me what happens after someone completes the assessment," Lily continued, her analytical approach demonstrating a natural understanding of user experience flow that rivaled the expertise of professional interface designers. Cassie navigated through the app's response system, displaying how MindBridge analyzed user input and generated personalized recommendations based on psychological profiling algorithms. As the results appeared on screen, Lily's expression grew more serious, and she began sketching in her notebook with quick, purposeful strokes that seemed to capture something essential about what she was observing. "It tells people things about themselves that they might not want to hear," Lily said, her pencil continuing to move across the page in patterns that visualized emotional flow and psychological impact. "And it does this without asking permission or checking if they're ready. It's like having a stranger read your diary and then give you advice about your secrets." The metaphor was devastatingly accurate, revealing why MindBridge's technical sophistication had translated into psychological trauma for vulnerable users. The app performed accurate psychological analysis, but delivered insights with the emotional sensitivity of a medical diagnosis. rather than the careful relationship building that effective therapy required. "Look at this," Lily said, turning her notebook to reveal a diagram that mapped the emotional journey users experienced while interacting with MindBridge. The drawing showed how initial hope and curiosity transformed into anxiety and resistance, as the app's probing questions escalated without corresponding increases in trust or emotional safety. Cassie studied the diagram with growing amazement, recognizing that Lily had captured in simple visual language the complex psychological dynamics that had eluded months of professional research and testing. The child's analysis revealed not just what was wrong with MindBridge, but why conventional testing methods had failed to identify these problems before launch. "Your focus groups and beta testing probably used people who volunteered specifically to help improve technology," Lily continued, her insight demonstrating an intuitive understanding of research methodology that would have impressed academic psychologists. "Those people felt safe because they knew their feedback was wanted and valued. But real users don't have that safety. They're just trying to get help, and your app makes them feel judged instead of supported." Edward watched this exchange with the quiet pride of a father who had long recognized his daughter's extraordinary gifts, while understanding that the adult world rarely created opportunities for such capabilities to be recognized and utilized. Seeing Lily's insights appreciated by someone of Cassie's obvious professional standing felt like validation not just of his parenting choices, but of his belief that conventional measures of intelligence and competence often missed the most valuable forms of human understanding. "Lily, could you help us redesign the app so it feels supportive instead of invasive?" Cassie asked, her voice carrying the humble respect of someone who had finally encountered genuine expertise after hours of professional inadequacy. The 8-year-old considered this request with the seriousness of a consultant evaluating a complex project, and when she nodded, Cassie felt the first genuine hope she had experienced since the crisis began, not because a child had magically solved their problems, but because she had finally found someone who understood human psychology in ways that transcended technical analysis and algorithmic optimization. The security office's fluorescent lighting cast stark shadows across the spread of documents that now covered Edward's desk as Lily worked with intense concentration, her colored pencils moving across fresh pages to create diagrams that revealed layers of complexity none of them had anticipated. What had begun as a consultation about user interface problems was evolving into something far more profound, an investigation that was systematically exposing fundamental flaws not just in MindBridge's design, but in the entire corporate culture that had produced such a psychologically damaging application. "There's something else," Lily said quietly, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who had discovered information that adults might find difficult to accept. She had been analyzing screenshots of MindBridge's administrative dashboard that Cassie had reluctantly shared, and her drawings now showed patterns of data collection and user manipulation that went far beyond the psychological profiling features that had caused the hospital crisis. Edward moved closer to examine his daughter's latest sketch, recognizing the particular intensity of focus she displayed when observing behavioral patterns that revealed deeper systemic problems. Over the years, he had learned to trust Lily's ability to see connections that escaped adult analysis, particularly when those connections involved the gap between stated intentions and actual behaviors in organizational settings. "What kind of something else?" Cassie asked, though the growing tension in her voice suggested she was beginning to suspect that MindBridge's problems extended beyond poor user experience design into territory that could threaten not just her career, but her personal understanding of corporate ethics and professional responsibility. Lily opened her notebook to reveal a new diagram that mapped the flow of user data through MindBridge's systems, showing pathways that connected psychological profiling information to marketing databases, advertising networks, and third-party analytics services that had nothing to do with mental health support. Her drawing revealed that the app wasn't just analyzing users' psychological states, it was monetizing their emotional vulnerabilities through targeted advertising and data sales that exploited the very information people had shared, seeking help for mental health challenges. "The app asks people about their fears, insecurities, and emotional problems," Lily explained, her pencil tracing connections between different components of the system architecture. "But then it sells that information to companies that use it to manipulate them into buying things. People think they're getting therapy, but they're actually being turned into products." The revelation hit Cassie like a physical blow as she understood for the first time the true scope of what Pinnacle Dynamics had created. She had been so focused on the technical challenges of psychological profiling that she had never examined how the business model monetized the intimate personal information that users provided in their most vulnerable moments. MindBridge wasn't just failing as a therapeutic tool, it was succeeding as an exploitation engine that violated every principle of ethical healthcare and informed consent. That can't be right, Cassie said weakly, though even as she spoke, she was remembering revenue projections and monetization strategies that she had approved without fully understanding their implications for user privacy and psychological safety. We're a wellness company. Our mission is to help people improve their mental health. Edward, who had spent years observing the gap between corporate mission statements and actual business practices, watched Cassie's face as she processed the cognitive dissonance between her stated intentions and the reality of what her company had built. His experience in the tech industry had taught him that good people could create harmful systems when they focused on technical possibilities without considering human consequences. "Show me the data sharing agreements," Lily said with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who had learned to cut through adult euphemisms to examine actual policies and procedures. "The parts that explain what happens to the information people provide." Cassie reluctantly accessed MindBridge's privacy policy and user agreements on her phone, documents she realized with growing horror that she had never read carefully despite having ultimate responsibility for the app's ethical compliance. As Lily studied the legal language with surprising comprehension, her expression grew increasingly serious. "Look at Section 12, Lily said, pointing to clauses that granted Pinnacle Dynamics broad rights to share psychological profiling data with marketing partners and research affiliates in ways that stripped away individual privacy protections while maintaining technical compliance with data protection regulations. The legal language was deliberately obscure, but Lily's analysis revealed its practical impact with devastating clarity. Users who thought they were confidentially sharing mental health struggles were actually providing information that would be used to target them with advertisements for antidepressants, anxiety medications, self-help products, and other services that exploited their documented psychological vulnerabilities. "This explains the panic attacks," Edward said quietly, his voice carrying the controlled anger of someone who had experienced corporate betrayal and recognized its symptoms in others. "People aren't just feeling analyzed, they're feeling hunted. The app identifies their emotional weak points, and then the entire internet starts targeting them with content designed to exploit those exact vulnerabilities." Cassie stared at her phone screen as the full magnitude of the ethical catastrophe became clear. MindBridge's sophisticated psychological profiling hadn't failed because it was inaccurate. It had succeeded too well at creating detailed maps of user vulnerabilities that were then weaponized by marketing systems designed to profit from human suffering and emotional instability. "There's more," Lily continued, her analytical process revealing connections that painted an even darker picture of systematic exploitation. "The companies buying this data aren't just advertisers. Some of them are predatory lenders, addiction recovery services with poor success rates, and relationship counseling services that target people during emotional crises." The implications were staggering. People seeking help for depression, anxiety, relationship problems, or other mental health challenges were being identified and then systematically targeted by businesses that profited from keeping them in states of emotional and financial vulnerability. MindBridge had become a recruitment tool for industries that depended on human desperation and psychological instability. "I didn't know," Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper as she confronted the reality that her entire professional identity had been built on creating systems that caused the opposite of what she believed she was achieving. "I thought we were building something that would democratize access to mental health support." "The people who designed the data sharing systems knew," Edward replied, his years of corporate experience allowing him to recognize the deliberate architecture of exploitation that required careful planning and legal consultation to implement. "This isn't an accidental oversight. It's a systematic monetization of human vulnerability that was built into the app's business model from the beginning." Lily's drawings had revealed not just technical problems but moral corruption that extended far beyond user interface design into the fundamental business logic that governed how Pinnacle Dynamics approached human psychology as a profit center rather than a service opportunity. The crisis wasn't just about fixing algorithms, it was about confronting an entire corporate culture that treated human emotional suffering as raw material for financial extraction. "Ms. Gray," Edward said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned hard lessons about corporate loyalty and professional responsibility, "you need to understand that you're not just facing a product failure. You're facing evidence of systematic fraud that could result in criminal charges if regulatory authorities discover how extensively user data has been exploited without informed consent. The security office felt smaller as the magnitude of the situation settled around them like a physical presence. Cassie was no longer dealing with a marketing crisis or even a public health emergency. She was confronting evidence of corporate malfeasance that implicated not just her professional judgment, but her personal integrity and legal culpability. "What do I do?" she asked, the question directed more toward Lily than toward Edward, as if the child's moral clarity could provide guidance that adult expertise had proven incapable of offering. Lily looked up from her diagrams with an expression of calm determination that suggested she understood not just the complexity of the problems they faced, but the possibility of solutions that could transform crisis into opportunity for genuine positive change. Her answer would determine whether MindBridge's failure became simply another corporate scandal or the catalyst for creating technology that actually served human flourishing rather than exploiting human vulnerability. The silence that followed Lily's revelation stretched through the security office like a living thing, heavy with the weight of moral implications that none of them had been prepared to confront. Cassie Gray sat motionless in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her phone still displaying the privacy policy that had transformed her understanding of everything she thought she had built during her career at Pinnacle Dynamics. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with mechanical indifference to the human reckoning taking place beneath their harsh illumination. "There's something I need to tell you," Cassie said finally, her voice carrying the hollow quality of someone whose entire professional identity was crumbling in real time. "Something that makes this situation even worse than you realize." Edward and Lily waited with the patient attention of people who had learned that adults often needed time to process difficult truths, especially when those truths challenged fundamental assumptions about their own character and moral standing. The security office felt like a confessional, isolated from the corporate world above them, where image management and strategic communication typically took precedence over honest self-examination. 2 years ago, my younger sister Emma had a severe mental health crisis, Cassie continued, her hands trembling slightly as she forced herself to maintain eye contact while revealing information she had never shared with colleagues or professional associates. She was 26, struggling with depression and anxiety that started after she lost her job at a nonprofit organization. She tried therapy, but couldn't afford ongoing sessions, so she started looking for digital alternatives. The personal revelation transformed the atmosphere in the room, adding layers of emotional complexity that made the ethical failures of MindBridge feel not just professionally devastating but personally betraying. Edward recognized the particular pain in Cassie's voice that came from watching someone you love suffer while feeling powerless to provide adequate help. Emma downloaded 6 different mental health apps, including an early prototype of what became MindBridge, Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper as she confronted memories that had been carefully compartmentalized to avoid interfering with her professional responsibilities. "I was so proud that my work might help her. I thought I was creating something that would make mental health care accessible to people like Emma who couldn't afford traditional therapy." Lily had stopped drawing and was listening with the focused attention she brought to understanding human emotional patterns, her young face reflecting empathy that seemed beyond her years but entirely consistent with her remarkable ability to read psychological states and interpersonal dynamics. Edward felt a familiar protective instinct toward anyone revealing vulnerability, but he also recognized that Cassie's confession was necessary for understanding the full scope of the moral crisis they were confronting. "What happened to Emma?" Edward asked gently, though his experience with personal tragedy had taught him to recognize when stories carried weight that exceeded their immediate details. "The prototype worked exactly as designed," Cassie replied, her voice taking on the bitter edge of someone who had discovered that technical success could coexist with human catastrophe. It accurately identified her psychological vulnerabilities, mapped her emotional triggers, and generated personalized content that was supposed to provide therapeutic support. But within 2 weeks, Emma was receiving dozens of targeted advertisements for antidepressants, anxiety medications, expensive therapy programs, and self-help products that promised to fix everything the app had identified as wrong with her mental state. The confession revealed the deeply personal dimension of the ethical catastrophe they had uncovered, showing how MindBridge's exploitation of psychological data wasn't just an abstract corporate crime, but a specific betrayal that had affected Cassie's own family. The irony was devastating. She had unknowingly participated in creating technology that had harmed the very person she most wanted to help. Emma started feeling paranoid that the internet was watching her, analyzing her, waiting for moments of vulnerability to exploit. Cassie continued, tears beginning to blur her vision as she relived the progression of her sister's deterioration. She couldn't understand how companies knew exactly which emotional buttons to push or why every advertisement seemed designed to remind her of her inadequacies and failures. She thought she was losing her mind. Lily's notebook lay forgotten on the desk as she processed the human cost of the systematic exploitation they had documented. Her ability to visualize behavioral patterns allowed her to understand intuitively how the constant targeting of psychological vulnerabilities would create exactly the kind of paranoid anxiety that had overwhelmed Emma's already fragile mental state. The targeting got more sophisticated over time, Cassie said, her professional knowledge of marketing psychology allowing her to trace the escalation of exploitation that had destroyed her sister's recovery process. Companies started coordinating their approaches, sharing data about her responses to different types of emotional manipulation. They learned which types of messages triggered her spending impulses, which images activated her social comparison anxieties, which timing patterns maximized her susceptibility to persuasion. Edward understood the implications with the clarity of someone who had experienced how corporate systems could systematically demolish individual resistance through coordinated pressure campaigns. Emma had become a laboratory subject for testing the effectiveness of psychological manipulation techniques, with her mental health serving as the dependent variable in experiments designed to maximize corporate profits rather than human well-being. She attempted suicide 14 months ago, Cassie said, the words coming out in a rush as if speaking them quickly could reduce their devastating impact. She left a note saying she couldn't live in a world where her own thoughts and feelings were being used against her by machines that understood her weaknesses better than she understood her strengths. The silence that followed was profound and transformative, filled with the recognition that Mindbridge's ethical failures weren't abstract policy violations, but concrete sources of human suffering that had nearly cost Emma her life. The exploitation of psychological data wasn't a technical problem to be solved through better privacy policies. It was a systematic attack on human dignity that treated mental health struggles as opportunities for profit rather than calls for compassion. Emma survived, Cassie continued, her voice strengthening as she moved toward the part of the story that had motivated her dedication to Mindbridge's development. She spent 3 months in intensive therapy, learning to rebuild her sense of autonomy and self-worth. But the experience taught both of us how dangerous it could be when technology companies treated psychological vulnerability as a business opportunity rather than a sacred trust. On Jules, Lily picked up her pencil and began sketching again. But this time, her drawings seemed to map not just technical systems but human connections, relationships of trust and betrayal, care and exploitation, healing and harm. Her visual analysis revealed how the same technologies could serve completely different purposes, depending on the values and intentions of the people who controlled them. That's why I joined Pinnacle Dynamics, Cassie said, her confession revealing the tragic irony that her dedication to preventing exploitation had led her to participate in creating more sophisticated forms of the same harmful systems. I thought I could build something different, something that would actually help people like Emma instead of preying on them. I convinced myself that our psychological profiling was more ethical because it was more accurate, more scientific, more professional. But accuracy without compassion becomes a weapon, Edward said quietly, his words carrying the weight of experience with corporate environments where technical sophistication often masked moral emptiness. I didn't understand that until tonight, Cassie replied, looking at Lily's drawings with the recognition that the child's moral clarity had revealed truths that years of professional training had obscured. I've been so focused on building better algorithms that I never questioned whether algorithmic approaches to human psychology were fundamentally inappropriate, regardless of their technical sophistication. The personal revelation had transformed their late-night consultation into something deeper, a reckoning with the human cost of technological arrogance and corporate exploitation that demanded not just technical solutions but moral transformation. Emma's story gave urgency and meaning to their work that transcended professional crisis management and entered the realm of genuine ethical responsibility. What would Emma want us to do? Lily asked, her question cutting through layers of complexity to focus on the essential human dimension of their decision-making process. Cassie closed her eyes and thought about her sister's journey from vulnerability through exploitation to recovery and wisdom, Understanding that Emma's experience contained guidance for transforming MindBridge from a tool of psychological exploitation into something worthy of the trust that people in crisis were willing to place in technology that promised to help rather than harm them. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky beyond Thornfield Plaza's windows when Lily Collins set down her pencil and surveyed the collection of diagrams that now covered every available surface of the security office. What had started as simple behavioral observations had evolved into a comprehensive blueprint for rebuilding MindBridge from its ethical foundation upward, transforming exploitative algorithms into tools of genuine human empowerment. Her 8-year-old mind had accomplished what teams of adult experts had failed to achieve, not just identifying what was wrong with psychological technology, but envisioning what it could become when guided by wisdom rather than profit. "I think I understand now," Lily said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had worked through complex problems to reach elegant solutions. "The app fails because it treats people like puzzles to be solved instead of human beings who need to feel safe and understood. But we can fix that by changing how it thinks about helping." Edward moved closer to examine his daughter's latest drawings, recognizing the particular intensity of focus she displayed when synthesizing multiple information streams into coherent solutions. Over the years, he had learned that Lily's most important insights often emerged during these periods of deep concentration, when her mind processed patterns and relationships that existed below the threshold of conscious analysis. "Show me," Cassie said, her voice reflecting the transformation from desperate crisis management to genuine curiosity about approaches to human psychology that transcended her professional training. The past few hours had systematically demolished her confidence in conventional expertise, while revealing the possibility of wisdom that emerged from entirely different ways of understanding human nature. Lily opened her notebook to reveal a new diagram that reimagined MindBridge's entire user experience flow, but this version was built around principles of consent, relationship building, and user empowerment that inverted every assumption underlying the current system. Instead of immediately probing for psychological vulnerabilities, her redesigned app would begin by asking users what kind of support they were seeking and how they preferred to receive help. "Look at this part," Lily said, pointing to sections of her diagram that showed how the app could introduce psychological insights gradually and with explicit permission, allowing users to control the pace and depth of self-discovery rather than being subjected to algorithmic analysis without their conscious participation. Instead of telling people what's wrong with them, it asks them what they want to understand about themselves. The approach was revolutionary in its simplicity, replacing the extractive model of psychological profiling with a collaborative model that treated users as partners in their own emotional development rather than subjects for algorithmic manipulation. Lily's design recognized that people were more receptive to psychological insights when they felt agency and control over the process of self-discovery. But how does it provide personalized support without analyzing user psychology? Cassie asked, her marketing background making it difficult to imagine therapeutic effectiveness without sophisticated behavioral targeting and demographic profiling. "It learns by paying attention to what helps each person feel better," Lily replied, sketching additional details that showed how the app could track positive outcomes rather than psychological vulnerabilities. Instead of mapping weaknesses to exploit, it maps strengths to build on. Instead of identifying problems to solve, it identifies growth to support. Edward studied his daughter's redesign with growing amazement, recognizing that she had intuitively grasped principles of positive psychology and strength-based therapy that required years of professional training for most adults to understand and implement. Her approach wasn't just ethically superior to MindBridge's current design. It was therapeutically more effective because it honored the fundamental human need for autonomy and dignity. "This is brilliant," Cassie said, examining diagrams that showed how Lily's positive-focused approach could provide personalized support without violating user privacy or creating opportunities for exploitation. "The app becomes more helpful as people feel safer, rather than more invasive as it gathers more data." Lily's redesign had solved the fundamental paradox that had stumped Pinnacle's development teams: how to provide sophisticated psychological support while maintaining user trust and emotional safety. Her solution recognized that effectiveness in mental health technology depended not on the sophistication of analysis, but on the quality of relationship between user and system. "There's something else," Lily continued, opening to a new page that showed how her redesigned app could detect and prevent the kind of predatory targeting that had nearly destroyed Emma's mental health. "The app can watch for companies trying to exploit its users and block them instead of helping them." The protective features she had designed were as sophisticated as the supportive ones, creating digital shields around vulnerable users while they engaged in the difficult work of emotional healing and personal growth. Her system could identify marketing patterns that targeted psychological vulnerabilities and actively counteract them, rather than facilitating the exploitation that had made MindBridge's current business model possible. "How did you learn to think about technology this way?" Cassie asked, her voice reflecting genuine wonderment at encountering intelligence that operated according to principles she had never been taught to value or recognize. "I think about how I would want to be treated if I was scared or sad and needed help," Lily replied with the matter-of-fact honesty that made her insight so powerful. "And I think about how my mom would have wanted technology to help her when she was sick, instead of making everything harder." The reference to Sarah Collins added emotional depth to Lily's technical innovations, revealing that her design philosophy emerged from personal experience with vulnerability and loss rather than abstract theoretical knowledge. Her approach to psychological technology was grounded in empathy and human connection, because she understood firsthand how it felt to need support during difficult times. "Your redesign solves the business model problem too," Edward observed, studying diagrams that showed how Lily's positive-focused approach could generate revenue through user empowerment rather than exploitation. Instead of selling user data to predatory companies, the app could charge for premium features that actually help people achieve their personal growth goals. Lily nodded, her understanding of organizational dynamics allowing her to see how ethical approaches to technology could be financially sustainable when they created genuine value for users, rather than treating users as products to be sold to the highest bidder. Her business model was built on the radical idea that helping people feel better was more profitable in the long term than exploiting their vulnerabilities for short-term gain. "But will this actually work?" Cassie asked, her professional caution making it difficult to believe that fundamental ethical transformation could coexist with technical effectiveness and financial viability. "Let me show you," Lily said, pulling out her phone with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who had grown up with technology and understood its possibilities more intuitively than adults who had learned to use it after forming rigid assumptions about its limitations and requirements. What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't witnessed Lily's analytical capabilities firsthand. Using nothing more than basic design apps available on her phone, she began creating a functional prototype of her redesigned MindBridge that incorporated every principle she had outlined in her drawings. Her fingers moved across the screen with the fluency of a native speaker, translating her visual concepts into working interfaces that demonstrated exactly how psychological technology could serve human flourishing rather than corporate exploitation. "This is the opening screen," she explained, showing how users would be welcomed into a space that felt safe and collaborative rather than clinical and invasive. "It asks people what they hope to discover about themselves, not what problems they want to fix." The prototype continued to unfold as Lily demonstrated how users could control every aspect of their interaction with the system, choosing when to receive insights, how deeply to explore psychological patterns, and which types of support felt most helpful for their individual needs and preferences. Her design treated mental health technology as a tool for self-empowerment, rather than professional diagnosis or algorithmic manipulation. "And here's how it protects people from targeting," she said, showing interfaces that would alert users when external companies attempted to exploit information shared within the app, while providing tools for blocking unwanted contact and reporting predatory behavior to appropriate authorities. As the sun rose over Meridian City, casting golden light through the security office windows, Cassie Gray found herself witnessing something that challenged every assumption she had ever made about intelligence, innovation, and the sources of genuine wisdom in an increasingly complex world. An 8-year-old girl had single-handedly solved problems that had stymied teams of experts, not through superior technical knowledge but through superior human understanding and moral clarity that transcended conventional professional training. The elevator ascended through Thornfield Plaza's 42 floors with mechanical precision, while Cassie Gray stood between Edward and Lily Collins, her laptop bag containing not just the evidence of MindBridge's systematic exploitation, but Lily's revolutionary prototype that represented everything Pinnacle Dynamics could become if it chose transformation over damage control. The emergency board meeting had been moved up to 7 a.m., giving them exactly 37 minutes to present solutions that could save not just the company, but the careers and reputations of everyone who had participated in creating technology that had harmed thousands of vulnerable people seeking mental health support. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Edward asked, his protective instincts making him question the wisdom of bringing his 8-year-old daughter into a corporate crisis meeting where powerful executives would be fighting for their professional survival with all the desperation and ruthlessness that such circumstances typically produced. "Someone needs to speak for the people who got hurt," Lily replied with the quiet determination that had characterized her approach to solving complex problems throughout the night. "The adults in that meeting created systems that treat scared people badly. Maybe they'll listen better if someone shows them a different way." The doors opened onto the executive floor, revealing an atmosphere of controlled panic that Cassie recognized from previous corporate emergencies. The particular tension that emerged when highly paid professionals faced the possibility of career destruction and legal liability that no amount of expertise or strategic planning could easily resolve. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, they could see Pinnacle's board members, senior executives, and legal advisors huddled around phones and laptops, their body language reflecting the kind of desperate calculation that occurred when reputation management and damage control took precedence over ethical responsibility or genuine problem-solving. As they approached the conference room, Cassie felt the familiar weight of imposter syndrome that had haunted her throughout her corporate career, the persistent doubt about whether her insights and capabilities were sufficient for the challenges she faced. But this morning, flanked by Edward's steady presence and Lily's moral clarity, she felt something different. The confidence that came from knowing she was finally prepared to speak truth rather than manage perceptions. "Miss Gray, thank God you're here," said Richard Morrison, Pinnacle's CEO, his voice carrying the strained authority of someone whose leadership was being tested by circumstances that exceeded his experience and preparation. "The legal team says we're facing potential criminal charges for fraud and consumer protection violations. We need immediate solutions, not just crisis management." The conference room fell silent as Cassie entered with Edward and Lily, the unexpected presence of a security guard and a child creating the kind of cognitive dissonance that forced everyone present to question their assumptions about who possessed relevant expertise for solving the crisis they faced. Several board members exchanged glances that reflected professional confusion about appropriate protocol for such an unusual situation. "Before we discuss solutions," Cassie said, her voice carrying newfound authority that surprised even her, "I need everyone in this room to understand exactly what we've created and why our current approach to mental health technology represents a fundamental betrayal of human trust and dignity." What followed was the most difficult presentation of Cassie's career, as she systematically revealed the evidence of MindBridge's exploitative business model, while watching the faces of colleagues and superiors who had approved policies and procedures without fully understanding their human consequences. The room's atmosphere shifted from crisis management to moral reckoning, as the full scope of their ethical failures became undeniable. 43 people have required emergency psychiatric care," Cassie continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the human suffering she was documenting. "Not because our technology failed to work as designed, but because it worked exactly as designed, to extract psychological vulnerability and convert it into marketing opportunities that exploit people during their most fragile moments." Dr. Patricia Wells, Pinnacle's chief science officer, interrupted with the defensive reflexes of someone whose professional reputation was built on the very algorithmic approaches that were being systematically dismantled. "Our psychological profiling technology represents years of research and development. The therapeutic efficacy has been validated through peer review and clinical testing." "The therapeutic efficacy has been validated for people who volunteered to be research subjects," Lily said, her clear young voice cutting through the corporate defensiveness with surgical precision. "But real users aren't volunteers. They're people who are scared and sad and looking for help, and your app makes them feel worse instead of better." The conference room fell into stunned silence as board members and executives processed the reality of being corrected by an 8-year-old whose analysis had revealed blind spots in their professional understanding that months of expert consultation had failed to identify. Several faces reflected the particular discomfort that came from recognizing genuine insight delivered by someone they had been trained to dismiss as irrelevant to serious business discussions. "Hein, young lady," said Margaret Chen, the board's chair, her tone carrying the patronizing authority of someone unaccustomed to having her expertise questioned by children, "while we appreciate your concern, these are complex business and technical issues that require professional experience to understand and address appropriately." "I understand that you're selling people's secrets to companies that hurt them," Lily replied with the uncompromising honesty that made her observation so devastating. And I understand that you're calling it therapy so people won't know they're being tricked. That's not complex, that's just wrong. The moral clarity of Lily's response exposed the sophisticated rationalization that had allowed highly educated professionals to participate in systematic exploitation while maintaining their self-image as ethical business leaders. Her child's perspective cut through layers of corporate euphemism to reveal the fundamental dishonesty underlying their entire enterprise. "She's right," said Thomas Rivera, Pinnacle's general counsel, his legal training making him recognize that moral clarity often provided better guidance than technical expertise when facing ethical crises. "We've been treating legal compliance as ethical sufficiency, but our privacy policies technically permit activities that any reasonable person would consider unconscionable." Richard Morrison's face reflected the dawning recognition that their crisis extended far beyond public relations or regulatory compliance into territory that threatened not just their business model, but their personal integrity and professional legacy. "What are you proposing we do? Shut down Mindbridge entirely? Destroy 3 years of development and millions of dollars in investment?" "I'm proposing we rebuild it correctly," Cassie replied, gesturing toward Lily, whose prototype offered a path forward that honored both technical innovation and human dignity. "This young woman has designed something that could actually help people while generating sustainable revenue through user empowerment rather than exploitation." What followed was the most extraordinary corporate presentation in Pinnacle Dynamics history, as an 8-year-old girl used her phone to demonstrate how psychological technology could serve human flourishing when guided by empathy rather than profit maximization. Her prototype revealed sophisticated features for mental health support that were more innovative than anything their professional development teams had created, precisely because they emerged from genuine understanding of human emotional needs rather than algorithmic optimization. "This is remarkable," admitted Dr. Wells, her scientific background allowing her to recognize elegance and effectiveness despite her initial resistance to accepting insights from an unconventional source. "The user engagement model actually addresses the fundamental problems we've been struggling with since launch." "More than that," added Morrison, his business instincts recognizing the commercial potential of technology that created genuine value for users rather than extracting value from their vulnerabilities. "This approach could revolutionize the entire mental health technology industry while establishing Pinnacle as the ethical leader rather than a cautionary tale." The conference room atmosphere had transformed from defensive crisis management to collaborative problem-solving, as Lily's moral clarity and innovative solutions created possibilities that none of them had been able to envision through conventional corporate thinking. Her presence had challenged their assumptions about expertise, wisdom, and the sources of genuine innovation in an industry that had become dominated by technical sophistication divorced from human understanding. "The question now," said Margaret Chen, her tone reflecting newfound respect for the child whose insights had surpassed their collective professional expertise, "is whether we have the courage to implement solutions that require abandoning profitable exploitation in favor of ethical innovation." The board meeting had become something none of them expected, a moment of moral choice that would determine not just Pinnacle's future, but their own integrity as people who claimed to care about human welfare while building systems that systematically violated human dignity. Lily's solution offered redemption, but only if they were willing to transform their fundamental approach to business, technology, and human relationships. 6 months later, the afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly redesigned Pinnacle Dynamics headquarters, casting warm light across workspaces that bore no resemblance to the sterile corporate environment where a crisis had once threatened to destroy both a company and the lives of thousands of vulnerable people seeking mental health support. The transformation had been as dramatic as it was comprehensive, touching every aspect of how the organization approached technology, human relationships, and its fundamental responsibility to serve rather than exploit the communities it claimed to help. Edward Collins stood in his new office on the 38th floor, reviewing quarterly reports that told a story of corporate transformation that business schools would study for decades to come. As Pinnacle's chief ethics officer, a position created specifically to ensure that all technology development prioritized human dignity over profit maximization, he had overseen the complete reconstruction of Mindbridge according to principles that Lily had outlined during their extraordinary night in the security office. The results had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The ethically redesigned Mindbridge had achieved user satisfaction rates of 97%, while generating revenue that surpassed the exploitative model by 43%, proving that technology companies could serve human flourishing while maintaining financial sustainability. More importantly, the app had become a genuine force for mental health improvement, with clinical studies showing measurable therapeutic benefits that had earned endorsements from medical organizations that had previously condemned digital wellness platforms. "Dad, look at this," Lily called from her corner workstation, which had been specially designed to accommodate her unique needs while providing access to the collaborative tools she used in her role as Pinnacle's Director of Human-Centered Design. At 9 years old, she had become the youngest corporate executive in history, but more significantly, she had become the moral compass that guided every decision the company made about technology development and user welfare. Her latest project involved expanding MindBridge's protective features to create a comprehensive shield against the predatory targeting practices that continued to plague vulnerable populations across digital platforms. Working with a team of ethicists, psychologists, and software engineers who had learned to value her insights above their own professional assumptions, Lily was developing tools that could detect and neutralize exploitation attempts while they were still in formation. "The pattern recognition algorithms are getting better at identifying companies that target people's emotional vulnerabilities," she explained, showing Edward visualizations that mapped predatory marketing strategies with the same sophisticated analysis that had once been used to facilitate exploitation rather than prevent it. "We can now predict and block manipulation campaigns before they reach people who might be harmed by them." Edward studied his daughter's work with the pride of someone who had watched extraordinary potential develop into transformative impact. Lily's role at Pinnacle wasn't ceremonial or symbolic. She was actively involved in every major decision the company made, her unique perspective serving as a constant reminder that technology should enhance human dignity rather than compromise it. The cultural transformation extended far beyond individual projects to encompass hiring practices, organizational structure, and fundamental business philosophy that prioritized long-term human welfare over short-term profit extraction. Pinnacle had become a destination for professionals who wanted to work on technology that genuinely improved people's lives, attracting talent from across the industry who were tired of building systems that treated users as products to be optimized rather than human beings to be served. "Ms. Gray wants to see us in the main conference room," said Jennifer Walsh, who had transitioned from Crisis Management Coordinator to Director of Community Relations, overseeing programs that ensured MindBridge users maintained agency and voice in the platform's ongoing development. "The documentary crew is here for the final interviews." The documentary project had emerged from media coverage of Pinnacle's transformation, with journalists initially skeptical that a company could fundamentally change its ethical orientation without losing competitive advantage or financial viability. The resulting film would tell the story of how an 8-year-old girl's moral clarity had triggered the most dramatic corporate transformation in technology industry history. As they walked through headquarters corridors lined with user testimonials and impact metrics that demonstrated MindBridge's positive effects on mental health outcomes, Edward reflected on the journey that had brought them from that desperate night in the security office to their current position as industry leaders in ethical technology development. The transformation hadn't been easy. Several board members had resigned rather than accept reduced profits in favor of increased social responsibility, and multiple competitors had attempted to recruit away staff members who had learned to create profitable technology without exploiting user vulnerabilities. But the results spoke for themselves. MindBridge had become the most trusted mental health platform in the world, with waiting lists of users who valued genuine support over algorithmic manipulation. Clinical partnerships with major medical centers had validated the app's therapeutic efficacy, while advocacy organizations had praised its protective features and transparent business practices. "Are you ready for this?" Cassie asked as they entered the conference room where camera crews were set up to capture the final segments of the documentary that would chronicle their unlikely partnership and its impact on both corporate culture and individual lives. Cassie herself had undergone her own transformation, evolving from a marketing executive focused on consumer manipulation to an advocate for ethical technology who spoke regularly at conferences about the moral responsibilities of companies that handled psychological data. Her relationship with Emma had been rebuilt on foundations of honesty about corporate impact on vulnerable populations, and Emma had become an advisor to Pinnacle's user advocacy programs. "I want to talk about something that wasn't in our previous interviews," Lily said to the documentary filmmaker, her voice carrying the thoughtful consideration that characterized her approach to complex subjects. "About how people keep asking if I'm special or different, when really the important thing is that adults started listening to what users actually needed instead of what they thought users wanted. The insight was characteristic of Lily's ability to redirect attention from individual exceptionalism to systemic change and collective responsibility. Her success hadn't come from possessing supernatural abilities, but from approaching human psychology with empathy and moral clarity rather than technical arrogance and profit orientation. The real story isn't about a smart kid solving grown-up problems, she continued, unconsciously echoing themes that had guided their transformation process. It's about what happens when companies decide to care more about helping people than making money, and how much better technology gets when it's designed by people who understand what it feels like to need help. As the documentary crew captured testimonials from users whose lives had been genuinely improved by MindBridge's ethical approach, Edward felt deep gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The security guard job that had once seemed like professional failure had actually positioned him to witness and support his daughter's emergence as a moral leader whose influence extended far beyond corporate boundaries. Letters arrived daily from parents of children with learning differences, mental health advocates, technology workers, and ordinary users who wanted to express appreciation for proof that business success and ethical behavior were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing when approached with wisdom and integrity. "One more thing," Lily said as the filming concluded and the conference room began to empty. "I've been working on something new. A way to help other companies learn how to build technology that helps people instead of hurting them. But I want to do it as a nonprofit, so the information is free for anyone who wants to create something good." The proposal was perfectly consistent with Lily's approach to problem solving, which consistently prioritized widespread positive impact over personal recognition or financial gain. At 9 years old, she was already planning to share the insights and methodologies that had transformed Pinnacle Dynamics with any organization willing to prioritize human welfare over profit maximization. As evening settled over Meridian City and the transformed headquarters of Pinnacle Dynamics, Edward Collins stood with his remarkable daughter at the windows that offered panoramic views of a world where their work was quietly making life better for thousands of people who would never know their names. The crisis that had brought them together with Cassie Gray had evolved into a movement that was changing how the technology industry understood its responsibilities to the communities it served. The security guard who had once watched corporate executives rush past him toward elevators carrying them to positions of power had discovered that true influence came not from status or wealth, but from wisdom, integrity, and the courage to speak truth in environments where such honesty was rare and precious. And his extraordinary daughter had proven that the most profound insights often emerged from the most unexpected sources, when moral clarity was allowed to guide technical innovation toward purposes worthy of human trust and hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.